Thank you. I know how boring it is to listen to long speeches. My speech will be about 20-25 minutes. Therefore, I made some slides. They're not very informative, but at least you have something to keep an eye on rather than to study my haircut. Let me start with this image in front of you. The economic chain between a final consumer product and its origins in fundamental science has grown so long that policymakers normally focus on innovations in the top and middle part of this chain. Its foundations in fundamental science become increasingly neglected. We are now in the middle of a global economic crisis. Taxpayer money is scarce, and it's appropriate to ask a question, whether curiosity-driven science is necessary or whether it can wait for better times. Voters do not see any immediate effect of fundamental research, and unfortunately, some of them see it only as shown on this image. A mad, childish scientist fools around satisfying his own curiosity. Accordingly, politicians take politically easy solutions and cut their science budgets. Even if the budgets are maintained, there is an increasing pressure on academia to stop fooling around and start addressing our immediate economic and societal needs. Is this attitude wise? If we take a very general view on the human history, there were golden ages and dark ages. Economists and historians all agree that golden ages followed major advances in technology. It was iron instead of bronze, steam engine instead of a horse, electricity instead of a candle, and so on. The relationship between technological progress and economic performance had been under intense investigation in both academia and policy circles, and much of the rise in our living standards have unanimously been attributed to innovation. But you don't need to be an economist to know this. If I start using a jargon of economical scientists, the major innovations are usually called disruptive technologies, a term familiar to many in the audience. Trying to distinguish most fundamental and important of those technologies, a new notion of general-purpose technology has recently been introduced. These are the technologies that are so pervasive they affect the entire global economy and explode into a multitude of different niche areas. They lead to a sustained generation of innovations and productivity growth for many, not just years, but for many decades. Example includes the steam engine, electricity, transistor, aircraft, internet, biotechnology, and so on. It has been widely argued that without a constant supply of such technologies, the stable state of the global economy would be just zero growth. Another name for zero growth is, of course, stagnation, a terrifying word for any government. The bottom line is that all modern economics approaches expect little or no growth without a constant supply of new disruptive technologies. Here is an important question for policymakers. Where do those technologies come from? Of course you know the answer. Every general-purpose technology can be traced back to either one or usually a group of earlier scientific discoveries. For example, the steam engine would have been impossible without thermodynamics, electricity without the development of advanced mathematics and general physics, and the transistor would have been impossible without quantum mechanics and condensed matter physics. Unfortunately, even names of some of those subjects remain unfamiliar to the general public. This is because during the last century, this economic change shown on the first slide has grown so long that even very intelligent people in the audience cannot probably trace a recent hot consumer technology to its origin in science. For example, try to trace iPhone to previous advances in physics, material science, chemistry, or mathematics. Most people trace iPhone no further than to Steve Jobs. This situation makes us emotionally and economically detached from advances in fundamental sciences. This detachment is so very dangerous that some people start thinking that innovation can be achieved just by improving design, better sales speeches, by tinkering with interest rates or reorganizing the banking system. Then they stop seeing the forest for the trees. Of course, those other innovations can temporarily improve the current economic situation and allow economies to grow, but not in any long term. Without technological innovation, other innovation would be impossible. Without the transistor and the computer, Facebook, for example, Twitter, social media would be completely impossible. Don't forget about the importance of technological innovations. Let us now have a look at the real forest behind the trees, the jungle called the modern world economy. For the last several years, we have been continuously told about the economic crisis, financial crisis, banking crisis, debt crisis, climate crisis, some other crisis. Economists discuss those crises and suggest new regulations, incentive taxations, and so on. And governments do their best to sort out the problems, not very successfully so far. After so many years in crisis, many of you probably feel that this is not just a coincidence, and maybe there is something else going on at the background. Indeed, because of my training as a fundamental science researcher, I see the current economic situation rather differently from most economists and policymakers. Maybe this is because I can trace indeed iPhone or say a satellite navigation system back to the very basics, to the underlying scientific advances of the last 2 centuries. From my perspective, I see that all those crises are only symptoms related to an emerging technology crisis. Many basic technologies that allowed the steady economic progress for many decades are now near the end of their lifelines. In my opinion, the rapid advances in technology previously allowed the global economy to cope with occasional perturbations in the system, even such as the gargantuan extravagance of the banking industry. It's no longer the same. Cracks appear in the system. Please don't get confused. Disruptive technologies are still around, and many of them are progressing well. New technologies emerge every year. And after you bought a new mobile phone or a three-dimensional TV set, you may not feel like there is any technology crisis at all. All what I'm saying is that the pace of technological developments is no longer the same as it was in the 20th centuries. And therefore, the emerging technology crisis is so easy to overlook. Now I want to argue the same point more formally, from the economics perspective. Let us have a look at the global economic growth since the very dawn of our civilization 10,000 years ago. This is GDP per capita shown in constant monetary terms. Different economies disagree in the estimates of how well off or bad off people were centuries ago. But the important message from this graph is that the growth in human prosperity is a very, very recent phenomenon. If we zoom in, the increase started as little as 8 generations ago. 200 years ago, in the 19th century, due to the Industrial Revolution, of course. We are used to continuous economic growth and may believe that this will last forever. However, there is no any fundamental reason why this growth should continue rather than stop within the next generation or two. If we replot the same data in a logarithmic scale, so that this allows to see us not only the growth itself, but the rate of this growth, you will find out that it's no longer as rapid as it was in 1980s, 30, 50 years ago. I deliberately did not include the economic data for the last decade, which would flatten it even further. Then one would say that it's a temporary distortion. No, it's a continuous trend, I'm afraid. Looking at this graph, I like to pose two questions. First, what was the origin of the Industrial Revolution? It's easy to answer this question, of course. The Industrial Revolution originated from an accumulated scientific knowledge during the Renaissance. Science prospered during the preceding 2 and 3 centuries before the Industrial Revolution. It was a long and complex process, and I want to make only one remark here. One of the reasons for the Renaissance was that the church, the norming and governing force in those days, stopped burning scientists at the stake for not addressing what was considered then immediate economic and societal needs. In the medieval times, policymakers believed that those needs were praying to God, burning scientists, and building cathedrals. The second question to consider is why the economic growth seems to slow down. Economists notice this worrying phenomenon, but no consensus has emerged so far. Therefore, I again refer to my notion of the emerging technology crisis. Let us look around for the next really big thing in science and technology. You can probably have your favorites. I have my own too. In physics and material science, the areas I know well, there is essentially nothing really as big as I would like to see. My only hope is the new material called graphene I'm studying, or maybe quantum computing. The recent breakthroughs can develop into the general purpose technologies. They can, but we don't know this for sure yet. Another example of our technological stagnation is the following. Every year, The Economist, the magazine, gives its Innovation and Technology Awards. They couldn't find any better candidates than personal spaceflight, Facebook, or 4G. This kind of innovation are important and can make some people very rich, but they're only third or fourth generation of previous great disruptive technologies. The bottom line is that the existing pool of fundamental technologies is now practically exhausted. And the reason for this is, of course, the crisis in our advances in basic knowledge. The last few decades, we have been stagnating scientifically, and now we lift off leftovers from the previous great discoveries. Of course, new big discoveries still come around occasionally, but again, their pace is no longer the same as 30, 50 years ago. How did we end up in this mess? If you look at the global research effort, the picture seems superficially rosy. There are 7 million researchers around the world, 1% of population of the developed countries, and approximately €1 trillion is spent annually on research and development. This is a lot of money, but please don't confuse R&D money with science budget and science budget with investment in curiosity-driven science. Since 1980s, the curiosity-driven research has been cut, and cut again by both government and industry. According to official statistics from the developed countries, 0.5% of their GDP goes into basic sciences, and this figure was steady for the last 5 decades. This statistic is just a lie. The used definition of fundamental research has changed over those decades. Remember, 50 or even 30 years ago, big companies were heavily involved in fundamental research. The driving force was, of course, to keep their monopolies. But this allowed science to advance and prosper. The financial markets forced industries to adopt a new modus operandi in which they can afford research with a horizon no further than 3 to 5 years. Famous laboratories like Bell Labs, IBM, delivered many fundamental discoveries, many Nobel Prizes. These labs are either no longer around or concentrate on short-term targets. Research beyond the 5-year horizon is now done mostly at universities. It's done at a taxpayer's expense, but for more and more often, the university researchers are forced by their funding system to address not fundamental questions, but the needs of local industries. The same has happened with the government labs and military funding. Try to recall times of Kennedy's historic speech, "Put man on the moon." In his speech, Kennedy quoted the British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on the Mount Everest. When Mallory was asked why did he want to climb the mountain, he simply answered, "Because it's there." Now, neither ambition nor money is around to address many things that certainly are out there and only remain to be discovered. The situation gradually getting worse and worse. Curiosity-driven science continued to be cut bit by bit. There is a huge political pressure to redirect any remaining blue sky budgets to address immediate economic and societal needs to sort out the current crisis. This is just a modern version of the old call for bread and circuses. What is happening now is that governments try to predict technology winners. Discoveries are unknown unknowns. It's stupid to even consider predicting when you don't know what it is to predict. Nevertheless, science is now plagued with pseudo-visionaries who declare that they know which research areas will be most important in 10, 20 or even 50 years. Of course there are smart people around, and many policy makers do understand the dangers of this policy, but it's so much easier to sell the story to any government that it can govern even scientific discoveries. This is such a danger for what is left of blue science research that I want to spend another slide to reiterate this message. Imagine a tribe of chimpanzees sitting in the banana trees and pondering over their economic and societal needs in, say, 20 years. The best idea they are likely to come with is to develop a new technology for banana peeling. Chimpanzees are unlikely to imagine that stone or metal tools are even possible. Governments and research agencies are of course smarter than chimpanzees, at least we all want to believe so, but in terms of dealing with the fundamental science, they often act no better than a bunch of chimpanzees. Curiosity-driven science is complex, alive, fiercely competitive organism, trying to govern it by using conventional business models does do more harm than good. Psychologically, it's easy to understand why most people are shy of and neglect curiosity-driven research. Scientific discoveries are unpredictable, and for politicians it's difficult to support, especially in money terms, something that is completely unpredictable. Take, for example, oil industry. A lot of money can be spent on empty wells. It can take many years before oil is found. The same is with pharmaceuticals and drug discovery. And we know how to cope with those intermittent financial losses and wait for eventual profit to come. However, unlike in any other business model, profits from blue sky research come not years but decades later. No patent, no monopoly can last for so long. Moreover, although profits from blue sky research can be colossal, they are always indirect. They come in the form of the global economic growth for the benefit of everyone. For example, the discovery of the transistor resulted in trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. It was invented in the US, the underlying physics developed mostly in Europe, and the tremendous benefits were seen decades later all over the world. Because of such long-term and indirect profits, the markets are neither smart enough nor interested in waiting. Only governments, and only if wise and not populist, can think beyond the next general election about the welfare of future generations. Such governments still exist, but unfortunately they become a rarity these days. Intelligentsia of all times and nations is famous for asking always the same two simple questions: whom to blame and what to do. As already explained, we can blame only ourselves for the current mess. Let me now discuss what to do. Obviously, we need a pool of advanced knowledge which should eventually lead to new technologies and innovation. We do not know where future technologies will come from, but we can't know. But fundamentally, they can only come from scientific discoveries. To make those discoveries, there is no other way than to invest heavily in our own curiosity. Don't expect those discoveries to appear out of thin air. The recipe for long-term growth is as obvious as difficult to implement politically. The developed countries can establish a blue sky program earmarked for research beyond a 10-year horizon. I cannot see knowledge and technology crisis to fade if eventual figure will be less than 1% of GDP. This translates for Europe as a whole into 10 billion euro per year, probably 10 times more than the current spending in the European countries. Please don't say wishful thinking. In the current climate, it's indeed a highly ambitious number, but no more ambitious than 2020 EU agenda with 3% GDP targeted at research and development. Moreover, the European countries can afford this, even in the current crisis situation. We managed to spend more than 1% for the space and arms races during the World War. In most countries, we put 1% of GDP in charities and spend nearly the same amount on international aid. This is more than we spent on science in total, and at least 10 times more than we spent on curiosity-driven science. We can be passionate about many things, but why does knowledge always come at the bottom of our priorities? After all, fundamental science was the very engine that powered our civilization to the current prosperity. Policymakers are somehow afraid of losing money on blue sky research. They should not. Of course, many blue sky projects will be like empty oil wells and lead to absolutely nothing. But be patient. It takes decades to go into profits. When funding blue sky research, people can always exploit the venture capital motto. Money is well invested if invested in the right people. The European Research Council has received so much praise in recent years because they followed exactly this formula. Many national agencies could take the ERC as an example for their funding policies. The Blue Sky program is doable and no more ambitious than the Moon program was. The European Union is now the largest economy, and despite the euro crisis, can show the way. Don't expect China to sort out all our problems. The really challenging part is, of course, not the money, but to educate the public, people, in fact ourselves, that investment in scientific advances is not philanthropy, but an absolute economic necessity. The moon program was very hard to sell to the general population, and without an enemy or an external threat, it would be even harder to explain the blue sky idea to a voter. Maybe it's just impossible, but okay, one has to start trying. To conclude, let me summarize the simple economic truth I try to convey. Without investment in curiosity-driven research, there could be no advances in basic knowledge. Without such advances, no general-purpose technologies would emerge. Without them, there is little chance for new basic disruptive technologies. And without such technologies, economists and we all know too well that the global economy will not grow much. If a serious investment is not taking place, not just in R&D, but specifically in curiosity-driven research, we will stagnate for many generations because of the very, very fundamental reasons. Keeping the current status quo is a global economic suicide, which is slow and therefore remains largely unnoticed. But don't fool yourself, it's as certain as the sunset. I do realize that few policymakers would like to hear my appeal. It's too expensive and too complicated to explain to their voters who already struggle in the current economic times. But I remain an optimist. I hope that maybe, just maybe, people in the 21st century have become intelligent enough to no longer think only in terms of bread and circuses. Thank you for listening.
Now, André, many thanks for this very clear message. First of all, I want to say that your message has been listened at in the recent package the Commission has adopted, so-called Horizon 2020. The European Research Council budget envelope has been doubled, making it the largest single budget line there. So there is still hope, in mankind.
We need to 10
now,
times.
We're a little bit short of time, but we could take a couple of questions, which André will answer. Please. I see one hand raising on my left. So a microphone, please.
Yes. So my name is Arturo Azcorra, and I am director of the Spanish Agency for Innovation. So I would like just to first comment that I have a PhD in electrical engineering and an MBA. Just to remind the audience that not all government officials are monkeys or people without any kind of training, also in relation to the statement by Michael or Larry this morning. Of course, I don't hold a PhD, but at least I can do some math. So having said this, I agree with you that there is a need for basic science, but I think there is a big risk of allocating most of the research funds to both basic scientists and large companies. And on my view, and the view of my agency, the great richness is precisely in between. What we are having as our policy banner is to fund small entrepreneurs linked with basic scientists. And what we would like to see is tighter and closer and higher collaboration between basic science and new entrepreneurs. We think it's not a good approach to fund again the large companies because they are the ones that know, and the very successful Nobel Prizes, with all my respect, because they are the ones who know. So I would like to ask you whether you agree with this policy I'm describing, which is again to concentrate most of the funds on innovative SMEs that closely collaborate with researchers and scientists? This is basically my question. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I never called everyone a chimpanzee. It's only sometimes the behavior is just a chimpanzee behavior. And actually, chimpanzees is a very intelligent animal, but it's a story for another time. Yeah, no, more intelligent than that. As concerns the policy, yes, okay, it's a very long chain. And what I was saying about the bottom of this chain, how to get new, really fundamental discoveries like quantum physics, like similar to atoms, similar to whatever, okay, as before, similar to graphene, for example. And in this chain, there are many problems to address, and what you are trying to address in your policy, trying to connect basic scientists and industries, is in the middle of this chain. It requires also addressing, but my worry is not that part. I know that it's taken care by many government agencies, by many people around, but completely neglected the bottom line of all our activities, the bottom of this pyramid on which all our society is based.
Hello, I'm Lata Sahanta from the University of Cambridge, and it's great to meet you because I actually study quantum confined electron systems. But anyway, my question is relating to why there are so few scientists involved in politics and making policy. We always think that the onus is on the population, on the people, to be interested in science and then vote for more blue sky research. The fact is, for example, in the United Kingdom, science really permeates the media. The people in the UK do love science and are passionate, but there are very few scientists on the inside. For example, there are only a couple of members of parliament who have any training in science. Why do you think scientists are not involved in the middle of policy?
It's a very simple answer. You know yourself, okay? The society is so complicated that it's no longer possible for a single person to attend all needs from policy to do in science. We specialize in our niche areas. I specialize in doing research. Some other people specialize in policy making. It's just a too complicated social system to cover, to bridge between different areas. We have to live with that, or we have to adjust to this.
Okay, and very last question, I'm afraid. We're running really short of time. Sorry about that. This gentleman in blue, please.
Professor Linson, just a short comment. It concerns the difficulties of the caricature. Belgium is a caricature of funding. I am the founding director of the International Multidisciplinary Neuroscience Research Center based in Flanders. Now, since I'm French-speaking, I have no right to funds from the Flemish region. Since I am French-speaking, living in based in Flanders, I have no right to funds from the Brussels region. And since I am French-speaking, living in the region of Flanders, I have no right to funds from the Walloon regions. So the only solution is to have funding from outside Belgium. So just a little comment. Thank you.
Yeah, bunch of chimpanzees, yeah, all right.
Okay, I think we need another question to finish, you know. Please, make sure it's the right one.
My name's Keith Simons, and congratulations on your Nobel Prize. You've recently been awarded at Manchester, I think, £50 million from the UK government. How has your research changed since the discovery? Is it still curiosity-driven, or is it more applied now?
First of all, these 50 millions were given to graphene research. They were not given to Manchester. That's a big mistake. We're still fighting for our share of this money, which is very welcome investment. Okay, what I'm trying, since the Nobel Prize, I'm trying to remain an active researcher. And probably during the last few years I accumulated so much inertia that the Nobel Prize didn't cause any post-traumatic disorder syndrome with me. So inertia allows me to go through this barrier without noticeable harm. So I managed to publish probably 3 science papers, several Nature series papers since the Nobel Prize. It's many people would like to have this score for their whole career. So we're working a lot, but concerning moving from fundamental research to applied, yes, even before the Nobel Prize, I really, try to pay attention more to applied research, because, it's an obligation. When you find something, it's an obligation for any fundamental scientist not to stay in their ivory towers, but also try to convey what is possible, because you have knowledge and expertise. So we're trying our best to bring it closer to the market. But if you would know what a huge gap it is between industry and academia, we are trying to extend our hand and limb and leg across this gap. But from the other side, it's very difficult. People from from industry come to us, and after I'm starting to complain, they say, a representative from BASF, a big company, after discussion in 15 minutes said, "Oh, but if you would know how it's difficult to do something new in a big company." That's really how things separated these days. Okay?
So, thank you very much to the audience. Thank you to André for his availability, his sincerity, and all the inspiration he gave us today. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the lunch.
Thank you.
I would say, spasiba. Housekeeping message for those of you who are finished with the headsets, please bring them back where you got them. Thank you.